communicating with all of this drama, people have heard a lot about it, to be honest. It's not that they haven't heard that warming water temperatures are happening or that we're seeing extreme wildfires, but we're not communicating in a way that's really resonating with them, finding that value and bringing in that inspiration so that they do something about it. So, I spent a lot of time finding various memes and comments, so I'm going to give you a chance to read all of them because I worked really hard on it. Alright, so let me tell you a story about. So I want you for a moment to put yourself in a position where all of a sudden you get this report. You see it, and it comes from a scientist that says there's a big problem that's happening out there. We actually identified that actions we're taking on land are impacting the atmosphere that we depend on. And if we don't do something about it, people are going to start getting sick. So this study comes out, and everyone reads it, and they get really interested. They say, okay, well, we figured out that us, these people on the planet, have this entire impact. Well, let's do something about it. We don't want people to get sick. So they talk to their local governments. And all of a sudden, we get every country coming together at the UN. And they say, this is a problem. Let's take action now. We know the solutions. And let's save people from getting sick. So they pass a universal law, essentially, that says we're going to get rid of those things that are hurting the environment. And they do, unanimously. 192 countries came together to do that. And then, as time progresses, year after year after year, we start getting these reports saying it's working. It's making a difference. All of those things that were hurting the environment, hurting our atmosphere, are actually disappearing. And the Earth is recovering. And within the next 30 years or so, that entire issue is probably going to be solved. We don't have to worry about it anymore. We protected people from getting hurt. It's a pretty amazing story. I'm not talking about climate change, though. What am I talking about?
Ozone?
A hole in the ozone layer.
What?
Yes,
A hole in the ozone layer.
Or
Scientists discovered that there is a hole in the ozone layer. It was caused by basically CFCs, aerosols. So, people got together. The UN passed unanimously a rule that got rid of all of those harmful aerosols. And by 2050, ozone holes can be completely resolved. We gave the Earth the opportunity to heal itself when it is. Now, this is not the same as climate change. They are different on lots of different levels. But it does go to show the similarities here and how we've been able to come together before to tackle these issues with the idea of protection and responsible management, that we take action now to protect future generations, and that solutions exist. We don't need to wait for science to save us. This is how we can take action today. You've probably seen this, but I do want to just reiterate what is our role in this. So we're part of a few regional, national, and international collaboratives when it comes to climate change. The one that we do probably the most in, to be honest, is this National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation, NOCI. And this is the idea of let's communicate climate change smarter. It's that if we just tell people the data, it's not working. We've tried, and it's not getting the job done. So let's scientifically test how we communicate about these issues. Let's come up with metaphors and values that resonate with people so they understand the issue more, and they're more likely to act. And this is where the heat trapping blanket metaphor came into play. Some of these different things you've heard me, whether through NOCI or not, utilize. And what we've been able to see is that right now we've got over 200 organizations reaching over 100 million people a year on these scientifically tested communication strategies. It's actually been shown to have changed the national discourse, because we know that we started these metaphors and values, and we've seen them infiltrate all of these different organizations, the media, even politics at this point. And we know that they're scientifically tested to work. This is the opportunity we have. And it's not just that when you go to all these organizations, you're hearing the same song, so it's reinforcing. But we're able to keep training more and more organizations. So we've got various workshops that we lead up and down the California coast and around the country to try and get more people involved, build that capacity for for organizations that want to talk about climate change, who might not have the resources or the expertise. The North American Association for Environmental Education. The acronyms don't get any shorter. This is the largest environmental education organization in the world, where we have the opportunity through the fellowship that I've been a part of to really work across different sectors of environmental ed. We've got more of the public-facing type of thing. We do offer school programs for different ages. But let's partner up with urban planners, with religious groups that deal with environmental ed, with pre-K, college professors, you name it. Let's come up with a mosaic of approaches and talk about what are some of the best practices and strategies that we've been able to learn and test and succeed on, and share those out. And to be honest, what are the things that we've tried that have failed horrifically? And let's share those out too, and make sure that people learn from our mistakes. And then we've been part of the Bay Area Climate Literacy Impact Collaborative since it was founded back in 2013. And this is really taking everything from that international and national level and bringing it down to a local level. Let's help build up the capacity right here in the Bay Area so that people aren't having to think about building new trainings for all their different organizations. You want a climate change training? We do this all the time here. Let me help. Don't reinvent the wheel. Or you just came up with a great handout on climate change? Yeah, share that with me. I'd love that. And let's talk about some of these different strategies. What are the solutions you're promoting at Cal Academy? Or what are the things you're promoting at Aquarium of the Bay? And how might we be able to get in sync with that and really tell a powerful story together? So this is how we're building collective impact. Not tackling this by ourselves, but learning and working with experts and sharing it with others around the country. So, what are the things to be hopeful about? I want to talk about climate change and solutions on many levels. I want to talk about the economics, I want to talk about the international, I want to talk about the state and national levels. And I wanted to start with the economics because this is what we hear about the most, I think, of the money side of it all. And what I find amazing, and probably the most optimistic of it, is that that argument is basically not valid as we move forward in the next few years. So right now, 16 states, it's cheaper to use solar and wind than it is to use fossil fuels. In the next year, 77 to 83% of solar and wind projects will be cheaper than fossil fuels. So this isn't an environmental issue. This is a monetary issue. If you want to save money, this is the way to do it, actually. Now, this is with most fossil fuels involving things like coal. Coal is what we've been so reliant on for a while, and we've been phasing coal out. It's just not economic, as you see here. And we've been switching and doing things related to solar and wind, but we've also been using natural gas a lot. It was this bridge fuel. It's not as potent as coal in terms of the carbon dioxide emitted, but it still releases heat-trapping gases, whether it's carbon dioxide or whether it's methane. That argument is disappearing as well. In the next 15 years, it's going to be cheaper to build brand new solar and wind farms than use existing natural gas plants. So we've got the financial situation actually in pretty good shape. A lot of people just don't realize it because this has been a drastic shift over the last few years. We've seen in the last decade around an 80% drop in the cost of solar and wind energy. So most people still think of this as the expensive thing, and I can't say that the media and coverage is helping with that. But when we truly look at the economics, this is now becoming a smart decision on so many levels, not just from an environmental perspective, to take action. And we're seeing companies picking up on that. So energy companies in particular. So Xcel Energy, which does a lot of the energy for the Midwest, we're talking Minnesota, Colorado, places like that. A fossil fuel company is going 100% clean energy by 2050. Duke Energy, which we have out here as well as on the East Coast, slashing their emissions by 50% in the next 10 years. So we're seeing that energy companies realizing the economics of this, and they're making a shift, which means everyone in those areas immediately follows suit. I don't need to take the energy and the responsibility on my shoulders of installing solar panels, because everyone in the tri-state area, or wherever you are, is getting renewable energy from Xcel Energy or from Duke. And we've seen the pressure that we can put on companies and different groups when it comes to the economics of energy. And that's with the divestment movement. $11 trillion as of last week. We just crossed that threshold, where people, companies, universities are getting rid of any holdings in fossil fuel because they realize that those companies are not good investments. Not from a moral standpoint even, but from an economic standpoint, that those industries are starting to decline. Let's get out now, but let's also make a statement that we're not going to support groups that are doing things that are going to hurt our environment. And $11 trillion divested. That's a huge message that we can send as individuals, but also as companies, as businesses, as schools, whatever it might be, to make sure that people are hearing a voice that we want to move away from these fossil fuels. So there's an amazing economic argument here. When we look at the international side of things, we've seen countries coming together, making a huge stand on this. 70 major cities representing close to 500 million people have pledged carbon neutrality by 2050. So all around the world, every country, you see some of these, and some of the largest cities out there have pledged to go carbon neutral by 2050. China, they get a lot of attention, and they are the largest emitters. US is number 2 today. Historically, US still beats out China. But China is actually pulling their weight pretty well in the grand scheme of things. So they already met their goal for 2020 about reducing carbon emissions, their intensity from it. They're not out of the woods. There's still a lot of work left to do, but they've already surpassed their goal a year ahead of time for carbon emissions. So every country is pulling their weight here. We need to keep reinforcing that it's not people who are just stepping away and letting other people do the work. They are actually doing it the same way that other countries are as well. India, France, UK, most of the EU actually at this point, banning gasoline vehicles in the next 25 years. Transportation is one of the largest sectors out there, and they just said no more gas vehicles. We're going to phase them out. We're going to make sure it's all going EV, and companies are stepping up. Volkswagen will not have a gas-powered vehicle in the next 10 years. Other companies, GM, Volvo, all making similar stands of ramping up availability of electric vehicles. Because pressure came from the international side. If you want to have a gas-powered vehicle, you lose the market of India, Britain, Norway, and all these other places. So we can see the impact that different countries can have on a global scale when they step up for things like this. Now, we think about international, though, and probably everyone thinks about the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement is a huge testament. Every country came together to basically sign that agreement. And currently, right now, every single country in the world is part of it, the US included. Even Syria signed up last year. We've come together. There's still lots of work to be done, but it brought everyone together and said, hey, we need to work towards this. People made different pledges. And a lot of news right now is really focusing on the US and how we're stepping away from it. And there's no doubt about that our federal government has taken a backseat to leading in this fight on climate change. But I think it's incredibly important to remember that that doesn't mean that all of the US has dropped out and is not taking the lead. What we've seen is that we are still in the lead. And this is where the second Trump said we're stepping down from the Paris Agreement, you had all of these states, all of these cities, all of these businesses basically stand up and say, no, we're not. We're still going to do all this. And it's been a growing movement. When you look at some of the numbers, over half of all Americans are part of the We Are Still In. You've got 2.4 gigatons of emissions, 37% of all the emissions represented by these groups that have committed to meeting the Paris Agreement or better. 58% of our GDP, so the economics being involved in it. And you've got all of these different groups. We're actually one of those 2,000 businesses and cultural institutions, the Marie Mammal Center, signed on for We Are Still In to meet the Paris Agreement. So we've got this huge movement, and there's no data necessarily to back this up, but I do actually strongly believe myself that what has happened in the last few years with our politics has led to this in a way I don't think it would have happened otherwise. We saw this polarization that really meant we couldn't rest on our laurels. We couldn't wait for other people to come and save us. We now need to act. And I think this is setting the groundwork that if we're able to get the federal government on board, we now have laid all of those plans, all that infrastructure, all that momentum to now leapfrog even farther. as opposed to inching forward like we had been for a while. Now it's mobilized in a much bigger way than where we did before. I can't say I'm thankful for what happened, but I do think that this has made a huge difference and gives us the opportunity to really take the next steps in the next few years, because we've gotten so much momentum at the community level, as opposed to thinking we all depend on this one federal entity. That's not true. All of these different cities, states, businesses realize the value to them and are jumping on that train. When we look at the state and city action, DC, New Mexico, Washington, Nevada, Maine, New York, California, all 100% clean energy by 2050 at the absolute latest. Some as early as 2035. Other cities that aren't part of those statewide things have also stepped up. For example, Chicago. Illinois, they couldn't get the state government to say 100% clean energy, so Chicago said, we're going to do it ourselves then. Kansas City, Atlanta, Cleveland, Denver, all of these other groups. So we see how much of an impact when all of Denver or all of Chicago decides to go clean energy, that can have on shifting the markets, making things more accessible to people, bringing down the cost of all of this stuff, and setting up examples and role models for other cities to step in that might not have some of those resources to do it in the first place. The businesses getting involved as well. Yes, Magic Kingdom, 100% clean energy. Google. They made news just last week for the biggest purchase of renewable energy in history. $2 billion in one fell swoop that they signed on to. That can power more than Portugal, just right off the bat. So this is a group that said, hey, not only are we hearing from people that this is a necessity, that we need to be the leaders of this field because we are so big and so powerful that we have the money, and if we're not doing it, people are going to riot. So they said, we got to do this. But they realized it was an economic decision. They're saving tons of money on this compared to using fossil fuels. IKEA stepped up, also has committed $2 billion to the plan. All of the IKEA stores running off of renewable energy. So this is not only helping with those businesses, but their supply chains as well. You think about the power that Google and IKEA had in that entire supply chain to get all of their people to go renewable energy, help shift the market and influence people. Different groups, Apple, Microsoft, Lyft, Wells Fargo, even Lego, are now 100% powered by 100% clean energy. Bank of America, Citibank, Visa, Coca-Cola, Facebook, within the next year, that's it, 1 year, are also going to be joining that list. And these are just a few of the groups that I pulled out. But you can see this movement that if the states or the cities or the federal governments aren't going to step up, these groups are. And it's shifting the entire perspective of how renewable energy is being sourced and used around the country and around the world. Just at this last UN summit, the one that happened 2 weeks ago or so, 87 companies pledged $2.3 trillion in market cap to say we're going to go to 1.5 degrees. That's the goal. That's the ultimate thing. And you've now got 87 major companies that have an amazing impact on the global market that have said we are going to hit that goal. We're not going to rest on our laurels. We're going to make sure we're leading the pack that's out there. And then you have the people. And I think this is where I get the most excited. Because when you look at what the public opinion polls are out there, 71% of Americans believe that the government should require 100% clean energy by 2050 for everybody. 71%. To give you an idea, when Martin Luther King walked on Washington, he had 24% support for civil rights. But you saw how far we got. 71%. Every single state in the US, -2, has a majority of people that vote that they would go renewable energy. There are only 2 states, I think North Dakota and something else in the list, are saying less than 50%. But otherwise, around the entire country, we're at 71%. When you look at some of the things that are happening in the news right now around the kind of fuel efficiency laws and things that California is trying to pass, things that the federal government, 70% favor the stringent laws. And we're seeing the businesses siding with the people that want this. So groups coming together and saying, hey, we want to go farther. It doesn't matter what the government is saying, we want to actually take that next step. And it's because we're demanding it. Then we look at how we act around it, though, and we see that there are some gaps here. 70% of people believe in climate change, but 65% rarely talk about it. Only 1 in 5 people in the US hear about climate change more than once a month. There's a spiral of silence around this issue. And if no one's talking about it, then no one realizes that it's an important thing. Because we're social by nature. We don't want to bring up something that we feel other people might not agree with. So if I don't hear you talking about climate change, I might not want to bring up climate change. But then no one's talking about it. And therefore no one's willing to bring it up in conversation. No one's willing to talk to their community leaders and say that it's something they care about. So we need to break that spiral of silence. We need to talk about it. And when we think about what people actually want, when we ask them, people that visit zoos, aquariums, science centers, groups like us, they want recommendations on how they can tackle this issue. They've heard the problems, but they haven't heard it. What can we do about it? So we've got this primed audience that we're training on climate change around the country. When you look at the people represented in this 70% stat, so zoos, aquariums, science centers, nature sites, things like that, more people visit zoos and aquariums in the US than every major sporting event in the entire country. Combine every NFL game, NBA, MLB, you name it, still not more than who visits zoos and aquariums. Add in national parks and state parks that are also part of this group, and that's the entire population of the US. That's an extra 300 million people that you just tagged onto that. So we see this audience that if we're able to provide some of these recommendations to, we can move the needle really impactfully. I wanted to share a quick video from someone that I looked up to. This is part of a Nova special that came out around 2-3 months ago or so. And they interviewed a climate scientist named Katharine Hayhoe during it. And you'll hear a little bit about how she talks about hope and climate change, and I'll share a little bit actually more about her background afterwards. Take a listen.
I think one of the biggest questions we all have when it comes to climate change is there hope? People often ask me, well, what can I do? I'm just one person, how can I make a difference? But if there is one thing that I wish everybody would do, it's talk about it. I'm suggesting that we talk about why it matters. What do I care about passionately that is being affected by a changing climate? Does it relate to my kids? Does it relate to something I love doing, like birding or fishing or even hunting? Does it relate to the economy or national security or the community or the place where I live? Let's talk about what it means to us, and then let's also talk about solutions, because there are amazing solutions. When it comes to climate change, we feel as if it is this giant boulder standing dead still, and nobody's trying to push that boulder uphill to fix the problem. The reality is that giant boulder is already starting to roll. It's got hundreds, thousands, even millions of hands. We just need a few more hands to get it rolling faster, but it is moving in the right direction. But when we look at what's happening with people, that's where I find hope.
So I look up to her for a few different reasons. So not only is she one of the premier climate scientists in the entire world, she writes a lot of the reports that are coming out around the impact. She's a professor at Texas Tech University. So she teaches climate change in the middle of Texas. And predominantly actually teaches it through the lens of religion. So she's a devout Christian. And the way she finds value with people in Texas and around the world is by talking about the things that they share similar values in. So it's not about, if I tell you the science, you're going to listen to me. We actually know that scientific authority is not a precursor to you understanding or taking action on what we do. There's a difference between us as scientific authority and professors and the scientists with the lab coats. We're a trusted messenger. They don't actually have as much trust. So it's our job to be those messengers for them. But she's been able to find this way to talk about how might climate change impact hunting and the things that you care about so much. How might it impact fishing and the things that you depend on so much. Skiing and the things you depend on so much. That's where we have this opportunity to really connect with people on individual levels. Find the solutions that match for them and get them moving, pushing that boulder. Now, we talk a lot about the different sectors and where these emissions are coming from because I think it helps us narrow what we can do about it. When we look at the big sectors, we know energy, we know transportation, we know food. And I've shared a few examples already, particularly around the energy side of things, where we're seeing companies, we're seeing cities, we're seeing states take over and say, we're going to make this easier. The default option is going to be a sustainable option. But there are other things that we can do in our own lives as well that make a big difference on all three of these things. At the basic training, we talk about some of those resources and things that we can bring into the conversation here. This idea of Project Sunroof, where you can find out if solar energy on your roof for your house, your business, is a good investment. How much solar energy might you get? How much money might you save? And what companies are in the area that can give me more information about it? We've got CCAs, the Community Choice Aggregation, that allow us, even though I can't put solar panels on my roof, I can still get renewable energy. So the power comes into the people and away from the monopolies. These make a huge difference, providing resources for people so that if they want to take that action, they can. One of the great things, the CCAs, the Community Choice Aggregations, so all of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area is on a CCA. All of GGNRA is 100% clean energy. They hit that actually just a few weeks ago. So we've got some great examples here at the center, potentially in your own lives, but also in the Bay Area that we can bring to the forefront. And one of the studies that I found most interesting around things like climate change, particularly things like solar panels, is it's a really visible thing. You can tell when people are using renewable energy. So there are groups that started looking at solar panels and how they proliferate around communities. And it turns out that they're contagious. Literally. That what they've seen is clusters form, so that when someone in a community adds solar panels onto their house, those neighboring houses in the community are infinitely more likely to add solar panels on top of theirs. And it spreads throughout that entire community because people are seeing other people doing it. It breaks the spiral of silence. So we can see how individual actions can also lead to collective impact. We need collective impact, but that doesn't mean that what you do in your own life doesn't matter. You play a huge role in this movement. When it comes to the transportation solutions, we've talked a little bit about some of the options that are out there, community incentive programs for businesses. Try and incentivize and really reward people for doing the right things. Make it easier for people by getting rid of barriers. We've talked about how things like the walking school bus can help get kids outdoors, into nature, get them exercise, and is ridiculously adorable. We see how groups, cities, are coming together, states, to electrify their public transportation systems because we know that public transportation can drastically reduce the amount of emissions that are out there. We've seen that happen in San Francisco. One of the things that gives me great hope is actually Los Angeles. They were really pushing to get the Olympics. And they did get it, I think, for 8 years from now, whatever 2 cycles, I've lost track of Olympic years at this point. But one of the big things that they actually had to put in their proposal was a way that it wasn't going to raise emissions. And what they did is they said, all right, if we're going to hold the Olympics, what we're going to do is between now and those Olympics in 8 years, or whatever it is, we're going to completely electrify our entire public transportation system. So LA is going to have a completely 100% renewable energy 100% renewable energy public transportation system. Chicago doing a similar thing as well. So we see how these massive movements are going to help tons of people, millions of people, but also set the groundwork, drive down costs, highlight what are the problems that they're going to run into, because we know that there will be hiccups. And now the smaller groups can now take those lessons and do it as well. But the risk is absorbed by the groups that have the ability to take those risks and get away with them. Food. We've seen a huge movement in farmers markets in the Bay Area and around the country. We've seen a huge movement in terms of composting programs here in the Bay Area and in California. Curbside composting, making it easier to do some of these different things. And we've also seen the awareness when it comes to some of the different food options that we take as well. So whether that's the Meatless Monday program, the Meatless Monday program, you skip one meat dish a week for 1 year. It's like driving 1,200 miles less on the road. Not too shabby. That's California to Denver. But now we think about the movement around Meatless Mondays at businesses and around schools. And I shared a story about students at Oakland Unified that came together and got all of Oakland Unified School District to go Meatless Monday. Earlier this year, all of New York City public schools went Meatless Monday as well. Every single student in New York public schools now gets a Meatless Monday program. When we think about those numbers, one person is 1,200 miles less. What about all of New York public schools? And we've seen that. Philadelphia, LA, different groups, San Francisco, Marin, all putting in place Meatless Monday programs at schools. To not only share this as an educational message, as a health message, but as an environmental message at the same time. Huge movement. We see the rise in some of the meatless kind of products that are out there. I shouldn't be using the word meatless, but you get the idea. Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger. These are now being served at Burger King. So we think about where some of these things have gone in just a couple years. They're now in the public space. They're now available and accessible for people to be able to take that right action without having to sacrifice them. It's not about giving up everything. It's about what alternatives are out there that still make you happy, that let you live your life, but in a way that's better for the environment. Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat, these are some of the largest growing companies in the entire world right now. So we've seen how that's been able to take a shift in just a couple of years. You're probably all familiar with it. So, this picture. This was the first day that Greta chose to strike outside of City Hall. Does anyone know how long ago that was? It was a year and 1 month ago.
She's great.
In 1 year and 1 month,
Amazing.
we went from that. She helped lead some of the strikes in New York State 2 weeks ago. They're estimating 4 million people around the world. 4 million people. The largest environmental strike in history, led by youth around the world. And they're seeing that it's actually changing public perception. Already in the last 2 weeks, we've seen that these movements are growing in popularity, that people are understanding why people are taking to the streets. This was started by a 16-year-old. 15 actually at the time. But we see how everyone's getting involved now. This is a youth-powered movement, but it's not just the youth voices. There's a whole group actually in Sweden that's, and I don't know how the Swedish translation is, but it's Greta's Grandmothers is the name. And it's that people at all ages are realizing that this is their future. Whether it's their futures, their family's future, their interests, the things that they love, and they're coming together and they're making their voices heard. This is the power that we have. So any action we take in our own lives makes a statement, but we can also make sure that people are hearing it, breaking that spiral of silence, so that we get people involved in this. Let them be part of the story. They want the solutions. They want that hope and inspiration. Give it to them, and they'll get involved. The youth in particular are heavily engaged. Most of the surveys in the US at this point show that 1/4 of all teenagers have participated in some form of civil action around climate change. That's participating in a march, that's writing their congressperson, whatever it might be. They are a huge asset, but everyone is part of this. So let's share this story. Let's share it not with crisis. Let's not share it with fear. Let's share it with hope. Let's get them excited, and let's build a world that is so amazing we can't wait any longer to have it. We have to do it right now. That's the story of climate change that we want to tell. So, with that being said, I tried to put on my best optimism face. See if I succeeded. I want to be mindful of time because we do have a little activity that we're going to do around closure, but I do want to give just a couple minutes if there are questions to share them out here. Otherwise, I'm happy to talk more afterwards. There are opportunities on the post-note board. But any questions right now about climate change? Yeah?
You mentioned wind farms. Is anything said about the impact on birds?
It's a great question. So we know that every single energy source that we use isn't going to be 100% perfect. We know that there are trade-offs. And unfortunately with wind energy, we know one of the biggest threats, and a very legitimate threat, is the impact it has on birds. And part of this comes into where we put wind farms. The same way we need to set up where we put solar panel farms, where we do fossil fuel plants and other things like that. And I think one of the things that gives me hope for both wind and solar is that we're starting to really build a more inclusive movement, where it's not just the environmentalists, for example, saying we need to put wind farms up everywhere, but they're working with researchers to say, where should we put up wind farms? And let's not put them up in the middle of bird migration routes, the same way that when we think about shipping lanes for whales, we need to be strategic around it. And I think the more and more we're having those conversations, we've seen the impacts of wind farms dropping on bird mortality. When we think about things like solar farms, one of my favorite examples out there right now is that we've actually seen a lot of agriculture people starting to put up solar panels on their farms. Because you think about farming, they have the best lands. They get so much sunlight. Well, one of the problems with climate change, unfortunately, is it's impacting the agriculture. And it's making things very unpredictable, actually, with farming. And that's their entire livelihood. And what we've been able to figure out is it doesn't have to be one or the other. Let's put up solar panels on parts of this farm that can still grow certain crops right underneath them. And what it does is it provides the safety net financially to the farmer. Because now they have revenue coming in from their solar panels year-round consistently. That if there's a bad year, they don't go out of business. But at the same time, we just increase the amount of land available for solar panels by thousands of percent when you think about what's happening. So we're able to identify these win-wins, whether it's with wind or whether it's with solar as we move forward in making this change. It's not a simple change. To change the entire energy infrastructure that we run off of for 200 years. But we know that it's possible because we've seen groups do it, and we know that the benefits from it are going to outweigh anything that we don't do. Rob?
I want to say thank you because I have been seriously struggling with hope, and I find this extremely helpful. And I would love to see, would it be possible to create a tool such as what Laura was using on the behind-the-scenes lab tour with some of the slides to be able to show people and use it up on the...
Just to make sure I'm understanding you right, are you referencing the iPad? Is that the tool that you were saying that Laura had? Oh, the pictures.
Flip chart.
The pictures.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
text that would help.
Yeah, I think very much so. So we've got a sign upstairs talking about climate change, but that's not to say that we can't add more resources.
Yeah.
So what I would love, and this goes for any topic we're ever talking about here, talk to Diane, talk to Laura, talk to myself. If there are things that help you tell a story, let us know and we can put stuff together. So we can work on putting together things around climate change. There are a few things, particularly as we enter into the time where we'll be closed to the public, where we have a chance to really revamp certain things that otherwise aren't possible. So whether it's what happens here in the classroom and how do we maximize the space, what about some of the tools, the binders, the interpretation station, I think Climate Change Hope is a great option for those.
Yes, emphasis on hope.
Correct. Yeah, without a doubt. Kelly, and then maybe one other question I want to take a break.
So if 70% of the people believe in this and people want to do something, why isn't anybody talking about it? Why are we having that statistic of nobody's talking about it, and how do we get people to talk about it? And
Because it's a spiral of silence.
Oh my
The way we
God.
solve it is we talk about it. So the way we solve this is we break the spiral. We start talking about it. We normalize concern, but we also normalize that right now more people want action than anything else. The problem is that we're not making our voices loud enough. And that's where all of us come into play. So break the spiral. Talk to people. Talk to your local businesses. How is their energy? Talk to your company. Talk to your school in your area. How are they doing things? And make sure that they know that it's something you care about. This is what we saw with things like plastic bags. This is what we saw with plastic straws. It didn't come from the federal government saying stop using it. It came from us saying we're tired of this. Do better. And we said it in a nicer way than that. But we got people involved because they knew that they depended on us. And we provided them alternatives. The market was available to it. That if you wanted to get rid of straws, you didn't just have to get rid of straws. Just bring in a different type of straw. Same thing here. Use solar, use wind, the CCAs, at almost no additional cost. Provide that extra ability. If If you've got a long-term opportunity, solar or wind is gonna save you just infinitely more over time. Let's talk about some of the transportation systems. How can we incentivize that? I think it's talking about the solutions and how feasible they are right now that make a big difference. Then you have things like voting, and you've got raising that platform about climate change and the environment to the national scale. And it's a testament that we had a 7-hour debate on climate change for the Democratic National Party. It was 7 hours. We never had more than 5 minutes on climate change in any election up until this point. So the things are shifting. And I will say it's not just a partisan issue. That 70% included both sides of the aisle. The leading wind energy producer in the entire country is Texas. They're super proud of it. This is actually a states' rights issue. This is around how they have the power to do wind energy and don't have to rely on some of these other things. So let's find that value with people, and we can bring it forward. But if we're not talking about it, people don't realize all the hope that's out there, people don't realize all the solutions that are out there, and they don't realize that there is an entire nation that feels the exact same way that they do. All right. Short question or long question?
Oh, short. So actually comment, short.
Comment.
Comment and short. I love these. I just saw them today,
Yeah.
and I think this is great. I think opening the conversation is, it needs to be like marketing. We need to market what climate change is, and with marketing, when you're selling a product, we can consider climate change a product.
Yeah.
And people,
Yeah. And we've seen that with a lot of these different things, finding that value. I mean, one of the things around Impossible Burger is they're not advertising it necessarily as this like, hey, you need to stop eating meat. It's, we just made a product that tastes like meat, but is better for the environment and for animals.
oh yeah, right.
And people. Yeah. So this is how you can find that value in people. You don't frame it as a sacrifice, you frame it as a win-win for everybody. And that's how we do it. We talk about it effectively. So I want to provide opportunities for additional comments, additional questions. I'm obviously going to stick around for a while. I want to make sure that Diane has some time to talk about the kind of winter closure, get some of your thoughts and feedback. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass out 2 different things that I've created and used at various trainings and opportunities that we've done in the Bay Area and around the country. One of them is just for you to be able to practice. It's just a worksheet that shows how we talk about climate change. So feel free to take a look over if you want to write things down. I'm not going to collect these or anything like that, but it's a tool that if you want help putting together a climate story, this is your tool. The other one that I created was a solutions bank, and it talks about some of the different solutions we can bring up to different audiences. No matter where you are, but particularly highlighting some of the things in the Bay Area. So this highlights some of the things on energy, transportation, food. They are not comprehensive by any stretch, but hopefully it's food for thought as you think about what can you bring forward when we're trying to lead with solutions to different audiences. So I will pass that one around, and then this one will start over this way. Again, please write down questions, let us know. I'll stick around. I do want to turn it over. I know you've been sitting for a while. Perhaps if you want to stand up, do like 2 jumping jacks to get the blood flowing. And now we're going to jump in to the winter closure conversation.